Welcome to our deep dive into Russell Targ's Limitless Mind. You've given us some fascinating material to work with.
Yeah, it looks like you're really ready to explore ESP, remote viewing, all those mind-bending possibilities.
We'll get into everything from precognition and distant healing to the potential scientific explanations. It's a pretty wild ride. Targ started as a physicist at Stanford Research Institute and somehow ended up researching parapsychology.
It is amazing how he ended up in that world, studying things that really challenge how we think about reality.
So let's jump right in. Remote viewing. This is a big one in the book.
Right, it might sound like science fiction, but Targ insists it's a real skill that even intelligence agencies have researched.
Oh yeah, I was reading about that. Psychic spies, basically.
Well, that was the idea. But back in the Cold War, the CIA got interested in psychic espionage. They funded this program at SRI, where Targ and Harold Puthoff were researching remote viewing.
Trying to train people to actually be psychic spies?
It seems so. They were training people to describe places and things that were hidden, far away, all that.
And they were using some pretty strict methods, right?
Right, strict protocols, to make sure no one was cheating or getting lucky with guesses. Some of the results they got were just remarkable.
Targ talks about Ingo Swann, too.
Oh yeah, Ingo Swann was a big part of it. He helped develop a lot of the techniques they used for remote viewing.
One of the stories that really stood out to me was about Pat Price. I think he was trying to remote view a CIA safe house.
Oh yeah, Pat Price. He accidentally stumbled upon a top-secret NSA facility.
Whoa.
Psychically.
And the CIA thought he had accessed classified information. Turns out he just had the wrong target.
It's one of those funny stories in the history of remote viewing. Price described the facility in detail. They even had a special crane system there. And all of it was confirmed by satellite photos later.
Wow, so even experienced remote viewers can miss the mark sometimes.
It seems that way.
But when they do get it right, how do we explain that? Was it luck, or is there something more scientific going on?
Well, that's where physics gets interesting. Modern physics, and especially quantum mechanics, suggest that we might not fully understand space and time.
Okay, how so?
Well, there are these ideas like non-locality and quantum entanglement. That's where particles are connected, no matter how far apart they are.
And that could relate to remote viewing.
It suggests this deeper interconnectedness that we don't totally get yet. Maybe it plays a role.
So instead of transmitting energy across distances, are we talking about tapping into some sort of information field?
Exactly. Targ digs into this model called Minkowski space, which basically proposes a multidimensional reality where information can be accessed instantly, regardless of distance.
So instead of sending signals, it's more like accessing a library where everything is already there.
Think of it like a universal library, where each point in space and time contains information about every other point. And remote viewing is like using consciousness to access this library. Mind-blowing, right?
Definitely makes you think. Targ even describes using remote viewing to try and find Patricia Hearst after she was kidnapped.
That was a huge case. Brought remote viewing into the public eye. Again, it was Pat Price who gave descriptions that led investigators to a cabin where they found two of the kidnappers.
So it seems like there might be some real-world applications for this ability.
There's definitely anecdotal evidence.
Targ talks about 4 main applications for remote viewing: evaluation, location, diagnosis, and forecasting. What's evaluation all about?
Evaluation is using remote viewing to help make decisions. Like Targ talks about visualizing his future workplace, which led him to Lockheed.
Interesting. Like using psychic insights to make better choices.
Exactly, almost like intuition amplified by remote viewing.
What about location? Seems like a more straightforward use of remote viewing.
Yeah, location is about finding hidden objects, missing people. People have used it for everything from oil deposits to buried treasure. The results have been mixed, though. It seems to depend a lot on the viewer's skill and what they are trying to find.
And then there's diagnosis. Is that like psychic doctors?
It's about sensing illnesses remotely. Of course, it's not a replacement for actual medical diagnosis, but some people seem to be able to perceive disturbances in energy fields.
So a potential tool for understanding health, maybe. And then the last application is forecasting. Seeing into the future, is that even possible? Or is that just pure science fiction?
That's where things get really mind-boggling. Trying to describe events that haven't happened yet. Targ describes some experiments where people were able to describe events that happened days or even weeks later. It's hard to explain with how we think about time right now.
He mentions this silver commodity market experiment. What was that all about?
That was a really interesting study. They used a technique called associative remote viewing. The viewer would describe images, and those would later be linked to different market outcomes.
So they weren't trying to see exact numbers, they were using symbols.
Right, like instead of saying, silver will go up 10%, they might see an image of a rocket taking off. And the results were pretty impressive. Targ and his team made successful forecasts using that method, which actually led to some significant financial gains. It suggests that maybe we can access information about the future just in a different way, through symbols.
That's fascinating. So all of this sounds incredible. Targ says that hundreds of people have learned to remote view successfully. Can anyone learn this, or are we talking about special, gifted individuals?
Targ believes everyone has the potential to remote view. Of course, some people might have a natural ability, but he compares it to learning to play an instrument. It takes practice, dedication. But with the right training, most people can develop the skill.
That makes sense. But what about all the mental noise? Our thoughts, our worries, our memories, doesn't all that stuff get in the way?
It definitely can. That's where training comes in. Targ talks about quieting the mind, cultivating what he calls naked awareness. Borrowing from Buddhist meditation, it's about observing without judgment, letting go of the need to analyze everything.
So shifting from our normal thinking mind to a more intuitive state.
Exactly. Bypassing those analytical filters, tuning into a deeper level of perception. Targ offers some specific techniques to help with this, including avoiding naming what you're sensing during a session. It's more about feeling, sensing, letting impressions emerge without forcing them.
Sounds like it takes a lot of practice to quiet that inner critic and trust those subtle perceptions. Targ mentions a simple way to practice this with a partner.
Yeah, it's surprisingly straightforward. One person picks an object, hides it. The other person, the viewer, tries to describe it. It's important to stay relaxed, receptive, and just trust the process. The person who hid the object can ask questions to help guide the viewer, but without giving away any clues.
That's like a fun way to experiment, kind of like a psychic game of 20 questions. What about precognition? Seeing the future. Does Targ take that seriously, or is it more of a fringe idea?
Targ really gets into precognition. He suggests that maybe our understanding of time as a straight line is too limited. He talks about his own experiences with precognitive dreams and this idea that the future might be influencing us now in ways we don't realize.
He has this one story about an experiment with Katra, the silver plate in the face example. Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
So Targ was trying to describe what Katra would be doing at a specific time later, and he had this vision of a silver plate being pushed into his face. Turns out, at that exact time, Katra was making popcorn and happened to stick her face into a stainless steel bowl to grab a handful.
So, not a silver plate, but the imagery and the timing were pretty close. Coincidence.
It's definitely suggestive. And Targ argues it's one of many examples that point to the possibility of real precognitive experiences. He brings up the research of Helmut Schmidt, a physicist who looked at how our thoughts can influence past events. And there's all the research from the Peer Lab at Princeton showing some statistically significant results, that people can influence random events in the future and describe future events with an accuracy that goes beyond chance.
So maybe we can't jump in a time machine, but the idea of knowing something about the future isn't total fantasy.
The research is pretty compelling. It suggests that our minds might be able to perceive beyond the limits of how we normally experience time. Targ even talks about this intervention paradox, the idea that even if we can see the future, we might not be able to change it.
Wow, that's heavy. Makes you think about free will, fate, all that.
It raises some profound questions about how much control we actually have.
Okay, my head is spinning a little. Let's shift gears a bit and talk about distant healing. Can we actually heal someone just with our thoughts? Or is that wishful thinking?
Distant healing is definitely a controversial topic. But Targ presents research suggesting that it might be more than just a placebo effect. He talks about different types of healing: energy healing, psychic healing, spiritual healing, each with its own methods.
So what are the differences between those?
Well, energy healing, like Reiki or therapeutic touch, focuses on manipulating the body's energy field. Psychic healing is more about using focused intention to directly affect someone's health. And spiritual healing involves tapping into a higher power or a spiritual source for healing.
So balancing energy, focused intention, and connecting to a higher power.
That's one way to put it. Targ talks about this Russian scientist, Vasiliev, who studied hypnotic suggestion from a distance. He showed it was possible to influence someone's physiological state just through thought.
Wait, are we talking mind control here?
It was controversial, that's for sure. But it showed that minds can be connected across distance. Vasiliev was able to make people fall asleep or wake up even when they were hundreds of miles away. It raises some ethical questions, for sure, but it's a powerful demonstration of just how connected we might be.
That's wild. Are there examples of mental influence that are a little less controlling?
Targ also discusses the work of William Broad and Marilyn Schlitz. They studied something called the stary effect.
Stary effect. What's that?
Basically, it's that feeling you get when you know someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them, like they're in another room. Broad and Schlitz did these really rigorous experiments and showed that there's actually a measurable effect, that our intentions can have an impact on other people, even from a distance.
So like a psychic sense that tells you when someone is watching you.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes you wonder, right? Maybe our thoughts and intentions have a much bigger impact than we think.
Targ also highlights the work of Caroline Mess. She was a medical intuitive who is apparently really good at diagnosing illnesses remotely.
Yeah, Caroline Mess, she worked with the physician, Norman Shealy, to document her abilities. She would talk to patients over the phone, people she had never met before, and give really detailed diagnoses that were later confirmed by tests. Her accuracy rate was incredible, sometimes as high as 93%.
Wow, that's amazing. It really makes you think about the power of the mind and its connection to healing and health.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about all the things we don't understand yet, the connections between mind and body.
Definitely. So, where do we go from here? Is there more to learn about this mind-matter connection? Does Targ offer any more insights?
Well, he goes on to explore the spiritual side of things, too. Targ's own journey is pretty fascinating. He started as a physicist, all about the scientific method. But all this research led him to question, well, to question the materialistic worldview that a lot of science is based on.
So his research into ESP and psychic phenomena led him to a new understanding of consciousness, of spirituality.
He came to believe that all of these abilities, they point to this deeper interconnectedness. He calls it a community of spirit that goes beyond our individual selves.
So he shifted from a purely scientific view to one that embraced a more spiritual understanding of reality.
I think his worldview expanded to include both scientific and spiritual perspectives. He started seeing these abilities not as supernatural, but as a natural part of human consciousness that we're just starting to understand.
That connects back to the idea of non-locality in the holographic universe. If everything is interconnected, then maybe these abilities are just us tapping into that underlying unity.
Exactly. And that sense of unity, it can be really powerful. It challenges our egocentric view of the world, and it makes you think about a more compassionate, a more interconnected way of being.
Yeah, I like that. So Targ's daughter, Elizabeth Targ, also became a researcher in this field, right?
Yes, Elizabeth makes some really important contributions, especially with her research on distant healing for AIDS patients.
Her work built upon her father's research.
It did. She combined scientific rigor with a deep compassion for the people she was trying to help. She was a great example of limitless mind and a compassionate heart.
I remember reading a story about a mysterious message that was received after Elizabeth's death. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, shortly after Elizabeth passed away, her husband got a letter from one of the healers who had been in her studies. The healer had a dream where Elizabeth appeared and she was speaking Russian.
And the healer didn't speak Russian.
Right, she didn't understand any Russian, but she wrote down the message as best she could, phonetically, and when they got it translated, it turned out to be a phrase of endearment.
Wow. What a story. It really makes you wonder about the nature of consciousness, whether those connections we have with each other go beyond the physical.
It does make you think, maybe we are more than just our bodies. Maybe love and connection can even transcend death.
Okay, so what can we take away from all of this? What does it actually mean to have a limitless mind? Can we all develop these abilities?
I think Targ's work challenges us to rethink what's possible, to reconsider what our minds are actually capable of, whether it's remote viewing or precognition or distant healing. These abilities suggest that there's this vast potential inside each of us.
It's been a real mind-bending deep dive, and it makes you wonder what other abilities we might discover as we keep exploring consciousness.
Exactly. Maybe the biggest takeaway is to just stay curious, question our limitations, embrace the possibility that our minds are more powerful, more interconnected than we ever imagined.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and until next time, keep diving deep into the mysteries of the limitless mind. It really is amazing to consider all the potential connections between our minds and our health. But Targ's book goes beyond the science, too. He talks about spirituality. Did his years of studying ESP and psychic phenomena change how he thought about consciousness and spirituality?
Oh, absolutely. Targ's journey is really interesting. He starts as this physicist, very grounded in the scientific method. But all this research led him to question the materialistic view, the one that dominates a lot of science.
So he went from a purely scientific perspective to a more spiritual understanding.
I'd say his worldview just expanded to include both. He started seeing all these abilities not as supernatural, but as natural, as a part of human consciousness, a
Yeah.
part that we just don't fully understand yet.
Like you've just scratched the surface.
Right. And it's interesting how that connects with a lot of ancient wisdom traditions, the emphasis on the interconnectedness of everything.
Right, it goes back to that idea of non-locality, the holographic universe we were talking about.
Yeah.
If everything is connected at some deeper level, maybe these abilities are just us tapping into that underlying unity.
Exactly. And that feeling of unity can be really powerful. It challenges our ego, our self-centered view of the world. It pushes us to be more compassionate, more connected to each other.
That's a great point. And I know Targ's daughter, Elizabeth Targ, also did research in this field.
Oh yeah, Elizabeth Targ. She focused on distant healing, right?
Right, and specifically her work with AIDS patients. Did her work build on her father's research?
It did. She made some really significant contributions. And, like her father, she combined that scientific rigor with real compassion. She really embodied that idea of a limitless mind and a compassionate heart.
I remember reading about a mysterious message that someone received after Elizabeth passed away. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. Shortly after Elizabeth died, her husband got a letter from one of the healers who had participated in her studies. This healer had a dream, and Elizabeth appeared in the dream, speaking Russian.
Wow. And the healer didn't speak Russian?
No, not at all. But she wrote down what she heard phonetically.
Hmm.
And when they had it translated, it turned out to be a term of endearment.
That's incredible. It really makes you think about the nature of consciousness, doesn't it? Maybe our connections with each other extend beyond our physical bodies.
It's definitely thought-provoking. Maybe we are more than just our physical selves. Maybe love and connection. Maybe those can even transcend death.
It's a beautiful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways? What does it really mean to have a limitless mind?
Well, I think Targ's work encourages us to question our assumptions about what's possible. It suggests that our minds are capable of so much more than we usually give them credit for. These abilities, remote viewing, precognition, distant healing, they all hint at this vast potential within each of us.
It's been an incredible journey. And it leaves us with a sense of wonder, doesn't it, about what other abilities we might discover as we explore consciousness.
It does. I think the most important thing is to stay curious, to question our limits, to be open to the possibility that our minds are more powerful, more connected than we could ever imagine.
I love that. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into those mysteries of the limitless mind.